So, the much anticipated remake is nearly upon us, and on the slim chance that it's somehow superior, I decided to rank all the bosses from the original game before nobody gives a damn. In my opinion, Resident Evil has never really been a franchise about impeccable boss design. The old games were primarily just shoot, run, and heal, and while the new games definitely had some fun bosses, more times than not, the negatives outweighed the positives. That includes the two recent remakes, I'm afraid to say.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
And while boss quality is by no means Resi 4's strongest aspect, it seems to be one of the only games to even come close to getting it right. I say that because there are some bad ones too, so let's see how they stack up, as we rank the Resident Evil 4 bosses from worst to best.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The second bout with Krauser at the end of Separate Ways is a rare example of this game having outright poor design. It's pretty much the exact same fight you had with Leon, only this time you're forced into much smaller areas, and whenever you deal enough damage, you automatically move to the next area. This normally wouldn't be a big deal, but in this case, there's a lot of stuff to be obtained, which you can't really pick up because he'll attack you if you do. And because of how this boss is designed, you neither deal with that while probably taking a lot of damage, or sacrifice the items after Ada ziplines away without your consent. You could argue you don't really need the items at this point, but it's Resi 4, you want to pick up the items. And the boss that makes you choose between leaving them behind or cheap unavoidable damage is, like I said, bad design. It would have helped if he did something different, but aside from the bullshit that I just mentioned, it's the same boss. A boss that technically shouldn't even be alive, and considering how shit the fight is, what was even the point of that? Leon had more history with him anyway, why not have that be the end? Instead, we get the exact same thing, just not fun. And for that, it earns the bottom spot.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
This one shares a lot of the same issues with the last boss, but due to at least having unique gameplay, it avoids the bottom position. Unfortunately, unique gameplay doesn't do that much for me if it's accompanied by cheap design, and for that reason, I never enjoy fighting it. The strategy is to knock over the nitrogen canisters to freeze the boss, allowing you to do triple damage. These are located throughout the area, and on the face of it, it does lead to a unique encounter. But upon subsequent playthroughs, it does start to feel a bit tedious, and the free rocket launcher tends to be the more fun alternative. That alone wouldn't warrant a spot this low, but there's still the issue of QTEs, which normally aren't that bad in this game due to the fact that you almost always know when they're coming. This fight does start out that way, but once you start fighting him properly, he becomes one of the few bosses in the game to still use QTEs when he's directly in front of you. Which again, wouldn't be a problem if not for the fact that he sometimes tends to do a normal attack too, and it's extremely hard to know which one's coming. This usually leads to a lot of cheap damage, making this my least favorite main game boss, and the one that I choose to skip via the free RPG. Or just skip the boss completely, which you can do, but then you're gonna miss out on the crown jewel. In the end, due to the unique encounter and boss design, it's disappointing that he's just not fun to fight. And I don't think I've heard anybody else say this, but isn't this thing a reference to the xenomorphs from Alien? Or is it just me? It can't just be me.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The most reoccurring boss in the game, having 4 separate encounters, which we'll be discussing separately as they're all quite different, the level of enjoyability you're gonna have fighting this boss will depend on one thing. Do you have the TMP? I know a lot of people don't like the TMP, but this particular boss is not the most fun thing to fight without it. I'm going to rank these as if you do have it, and for that reason, the Separate Ways El Gigante is kind of pointless. See, upgrades aren't a thing in that campaign, so the TMP you purchase is already quite strong. I think the weapons you get in separate ways are meant to coincide with the enemies being a lot tougher, but as for this boss, I don't think they changed anything. They could have made it a bit stronger, who knows, but in this case it's not changing much, making this more of a joke than a boss.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Yet another version of Krauser, which is almost as pointless as the assignment Ada game itself.
Shocking.
I have no idea why any of this exists. I hope the remake gets rid of it. I don't think it's canon, and I don't care enough to look. Why you fight Krauser again is beyond me. It's utterly pointless. Nothing changes, the exact same fight. Let's just move on.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The second El Gigante you fight is completely optional, unless you're like me and insist upon taking both paths. If you don't prefer that, then I actually advise avoiding this boss if you want the better experience, as the left path provides you with some unique enemies which you won't see again within the main game. But if you want things to be easy, then I'd fight the El Gigante, as again, it's kinda pathetic. The TMP is not going to be as strong as with Ada, but it's still good enough to take this thing out before it can even touch you. Unfortunately, this is the only boss in the game you fight with Ashley, and despite mainly never touching you, it does tend to grab her in the few seconds it has before enough damage is dealt to bring it down. The reason this is so annoying is because aside from that, the boss is contrived as hell. It does include the boulder mechanic, putting in a few spots up, but even still, it's not that complex. So if you want things done quick and easy, then just take the right path and be on your way. Unless you don't have the TMP, then don't come this way. It's not gonna be good.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The boss that most people tend to save the rocket launcher for, and I don't know if that's because it's difficult or just boring. It's definitely intimidating at first, but once you know how to fight it, it's just shoot the eye until he's exposed, shoot him enough times, rinse and repeat, and the boss dies. Yeah, it may have a few one-hit kill moves, but it's not the hardest thing to avoid. And for an enemy you likely spent the last third of the game wanting to kill, it's a shame the fight is so lackluster. I'd like to say more about it, but in the end, it's just a big enemy you shoot and it dies. Doesn't have that many moves, doesn't do that much period, it's just forgettable. If you can spare the money for a rocket launcher, it may still be the best route.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Sadly, none of the bosses outside the main game really do it for me, and that includes the only unique boss, being Sadler, in his untransformed stage. The reason for this is not so much the boss itself, more so the stuff you have on you at this point. See, while the game mostly gives you the same weapons Leon has, the exception to this is Ada's iconic bowgun, which, as you may know, is quite strong. Unfortunately, due to limited inventory, it's very unlikely you'll get this until late game. And unless you waste the ammo on basic enemies, assuming there'll be no final boss, you're gonna have most of the bowgun ammo to use against Sadler. This results in a fight that feels a lot like an infinite ammo run, and it doesn't take that long to get him down. I originally assumed that was the idea, but he doesn't feel like a boss you deliberately save your strongest gun for. Yeah, he may get a few hits in, but it always seems like the odds are heavily stacked in my favor. You could be low on other resources like health, the previous boss makes that very likely, but as long as you have the bowgun, I don't see Sadler being anything but a pushover.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Okay, so apparently this is one of the most, if not the most, popular boss in the game. So much so that a lot of people weren't happy when they thought the remake might change it. It's definitely unique and memorable, but I wouldn't say one of my all-time favorites.
Is this a joke?
Mainly because dodging debris is not the most fun thing in my opinion, and while infinite harpoons are a nice mechanic, it's too often that you don't get an opening to throw them because of the shit you have to dodge. This can result in the boss feeling monotonous at times, assuming things don't line up, but that doesn't mean it's without value. Cinematically, the boss looks great. I love the different angles you get, assuming you have to swim back to the boat via debris, and the bit when you almost get dragged under is a nice touch. I don't see it as the best boss in the game, or the village, or anything close for that matter, but it's decent, and above all, it's memorable.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
So, obviously, 2 El Gigante is not my favorite encounter with this boss, because in the end, that's not really what it is. Yeah, you can fight 2 if you want, thus giving you more money, but considering the ammo that'll cost you, it's probably not worth it. The idea here is to drop one inside the lava, which you can easily do by utilizing the zip line, but I don't know if I'd call that engaging. I think a better idea would be if fighting 2 was the intended way, and making the lava trap more difficult to pull off. You'd have to give them a bit less health to make things fair, assuming you don't want to use that method, but the idea of a boss that rewards you for doing something difficult is the type of game design I personally love. Instead, you have the option to fight 2 of them for money, which is doable, but probably not worth it, or use the obvious method to get what is basically the same boss that by now you've already fought twice. You will have the Magnum this time to speed things up, but as mentioned, against this boss, you really don't need it. That being said, the El Gigante is still a boss I enjoy fighting a great deal, and they did give them both unique designs, so I can't complain too much.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
So, from this point on, I like all of these bosses a great deal. Unfortunately, Sadler himself, despite being quite fun, has to rank a bit lower simply because he's too easy. See, the idea is to weaken him into exposing his main eye, and then stab him in said eye via a button prompt, or just shoot the eye, which seems to do more damage. You can do this by shooting one of the other eyes, which is the most damaging method, or use one of the many other alternatives, such as the barrels or the cranes located in the area, or simply throwing grenades. Granted, the grenades are the least damaging, which they should be since they're the easiest to use, but you could easily get away with not shooting the eyes at all. There's so many other ways of getting this done, it's just not an intimidating final boss. He can, and likely will, damage you too with somewhat cheap attacks and not very fair QTEs, but in the end, none of this really matters as he's just too easy to beat. I do like how if you kill him without the rocket launcher, you get a unique cutscene, but in the end, it's a lot like the Separate Ways version in which he can damage you very easily, but not as easy as you can damage him. If you're wondering why he gets this high, it's because he's still a real damn fun fight. It may not be that challenging, but still a decent way to end the game.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
U3 is, again, not perfect, but what he does right, he does real damn good. First off, I really like his intro. He's barely even hinted at, and then out of nowhere you're being pursued by this monstrosity. The first stage of this fight is probably my favorite as you try to evade him in a maze-like structure, invoking a claustrophobic feel you don't see in this game too often. It's quite unique in that sense, and the QTEs are used to good effect this time because you know when they're gonna happen. I also like how you think you've escaped, only to realize you've transitioned into stage 2, which isn't as good, but it's not bad either. It's your basic run-of-the-mill boss fight, a few unique elements thrown in, like the gates you can close on him, and some obsessive QTEs. Which isn't hard to avoid, it's just stupid. He also plays dead, which is a nice touch I guess, but in the end it's nothing too special. In this case, it's really the first stage that does it for me, as it's a unique segment that seems to have gone a bit underrated. In fact, it kind of reminds me of the Gator from Resi 2. Not because it's similar in design, but because it has a unique design, which was switched out for a run and dodge section in the remake. Given the fact that the second stage isn't particularly liked, I could definitely see that happening here.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Yes, despite my complaints, I am a huge fan of El Gigante. You know, when you get to fight him, instead of tedious bullshit. Honestly, I don't know why this boss is so much fun, it just is. The TMP is still the way to go, and it does make the boss rather easy, but it doesn't take away from the enjoyment factor. It has a lot of memorable moves, such as throwing fucking tree trunks at you. The intro, when it massacres the Ganados, is epic as all hell and really gets you excited. And who could forget the wolf, who comes back to help you, assuming you helped him at the beginning of the game. I mean, I'd assume that's the reason. You'd have to be some kind of masochist to not help him just to see what happens, but you get the idea. Not that you really need help as long as you have the trusty TMP, but if you're still against using it, at least buy it for this boss, as using anything else is not a good idea. The El Gigante is a classic boss of Resi 4, one of the most fun to fight, and for me is always going to rank quite high. Unless you didn't have the TMP, then it would be shit. Let's hope the remake doesn't make that a thing.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
This one's a bit complicated. The reason I love this boss, aside from his great design and badass transformation, is the strategy you use to fight him. A lot of elements to this boss had players thinking he was cheap, like when he'd swing in the air and strike you even if you hit him, and having to circle around the whole area just to get past him without taking damage. Fact is, while this would be problematic if true, the fact is, it mostly isn't. You can walk past the boss without getting hit, it's very doable, and as for taking cheap damage, well, sometimes you're not supposed to be close to him. It's one of the few bosses to encourage using the sniper rifle, something you can get away with not having in the village area, and if that's the case, you definitely don't need it, but it can come in handy. The only thing you don't want to use is the shotgun, as getting close to him isn't the best idea. It's more of a strategic boss that doesn't take a whole lot to kill, but you're gonna want to think about which weapons you're using and when to keep your distance. It's a fight that I've come to appreciate a lot more, and as you can see, it's become one of my favorites. It's a great way to end off what is most people's favorite section of the game, being the village, and if you don't agree with anything I've said, then just save up those incendiary grenades. He really doesn't like those.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Despite my hatred for the other versions of this, I fucking love the Krauser boss. And that's because it does something unlike any other enemy in the game, and that is encouraging the usage of the knife. Well, technically you use the knife for almost everything in the game, but not so much like this. Krauser is designed to be fought with the knife only. Yeah, you can use guns, and probably should at times, but the way the two of them clash, properly utilizing QTEs, is unlike anything else in the game, and is just cool as shit. You encounter him earlier in the game, engaging in what is nothing but a long QTE event, and think if only we could have something like this, but with actual gameplay. Well, that's what this boss gives you. It's fucking epic as hell, the optional back and forth dialogue is a great touch, and if not for the stupid robots, I wouldn't have a single complaint. Then you get to the second stage, and it's one of the best things in any Resi game. His hand transforms into a giant blade, just because, and it's you and your knife versus him and his hand, and it's the kind of thing you'd think wouldn't work, but for some reason it just does, and it's fucking amazing. It's too bad the other fights with him fucking suck due to dumb mechanics and being over too quickly. And one of the biggest missteps of the game, plot-wise, is not having Krauser die from this. Why they thought having Ada finish him off the exact same way was a good thing, I'll never know, and if they have any sense at all, they'll change that in the remake. Speaking of which, I don't know how they'll ever match this type of quality, but we'll have to see. Regardless, Krauser is one of the best bosses in Resident Evil history, probably the most unique, and maybe even my favorite in the entire franchise. I'm sure nobody agrees, but that's just the way it goes. And that is all the bosses of Resident Evil 4, ranked in an order that I tried to make somewhat objective, but let's face it, that's not gonna happen. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below, assuming you give a damn, and stay tuned as the remake is nearly upon us, which should lead to some interesting discussions. I am the Game Analyst, and don't forget, 2 is better than 1. Unless one of those 2 is killed with no thought, then it's just 1. Unless you have a Magnum, then it's just stupid. Oh, what? You're actually here? That's fucking amazing. I guess you may as well check out the main channel, in which I discuss movies, TV series, and the offensive topics that lie within. If you're into that, then press the link in the description. It's right there.